Okay, well, welcome to this PRCA Midlands event. Thank you all for your time today. We've got an absolutely cracking panel lined up for you, which is going to be chaired by Anne-Marie Blake. I shall introduce the panelists in a moment, but just to say, I think everyone can see that this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it on YouTube later on and share it with colleagues and other interested parties. So on to our panel. The brilliant Anne-Marie Blake is a highly experienced and award-winning senior comms professional. She's got a background in large, complex international corporate organisations. She's worked with many complex, organisations right across Europe, leading teams or Europe, Asia and the US. But she also was involved in she's a founding member of the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board, which was founded in July 2020. And I think it's fair to say the board has already achieved many great things, but Anne-Marie, I think there's still work to do in terms of what we all need to do in terms of delivering on diversity in much more across the board. This session actually follows on from a session from Barbara Phillips towards the end of last year, who talked to some of the people on this call about some of the stats. It was a bit of a wake-up call actually around the realities of diversity and inclusion. So this session is intended really to be very much around more practical best practice recommendations and an opportunity to talk about the considerations that we all need to take on board so that we can deliver better across the diversity and inclusion piece. So as I say, Anne-Marie is going to be chairing this session. We've then got Barrie Hodge, who is head of fundraising and comms at St Basils. St Basils essentially exists to make sure that every young person has the right to a home, an education, employment and security so that they can feel safe and be useful members of society. These young people who often through no fault of their own have had a pretty tough start to life, and so part of getting them into employment is a critical part of St Basil's role. I know Barry's got some interesting thoughts on that, and I have to say, having had some first-hand experience with some of the young people who they may not have had a traditional education, but they're bright, they're creative, they're hardworking, and I think potentially are a fantastic new stream of talent for the PR industry. Rob Markwell is MD and founder of Pitch, which he founded 15 years ago. Congratulations, Rob, on just achieving your 15 years. And Rob specialises across the world of marketing, comms and creative. That's agencies in-house, right across account handling, project management, data, pricing, research, design, web development, media, PR, social, paid and organic search, so the whole caboodle. And then we've also got Tara Tomes, who owns and runs the award-winning PR agency East Village. Tara's team works very much with purpose-driven brands. She's very much an advocate for making the PR industry more diverse, and she's actually a founding member of the BPFS, the Business Professional and Financial Services Black Leaders Network, a collective of established leaders who share best practice and help businesses change their approach to DEI. So without further ado, over to you, Anne-Marie.
And you know what, I've got one of those Ring doorbells and it's just gone off, so I'm hoping that someone else in the house will go and open it. It's always the way, isn't it? So thank you very, very much for that marvellous introduction, Bron. I think sometimes when you hear about yourself, it's like, who is this person she's talking about? Oh, she's talking about me. So thank you for those kind words, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. Before I kind of go on to kind of my first question, I kind of always have a little bit of a preamble, and due to events in like many parts of the world, diversity, equity and inclusion really has been a huge topic of conversation, particularly over the past couple of years. I think I've had more conversations in the past 2 years than the other 25 years of my comms career. I think it really has kind of come up the agenda. It's also become an important part of the work that we're all doing for our clients and within our own organisations as well. So it's really great that we're going to be able to learn today a little bit more about best practice. The PRCA Census, so we're all members of the PRCA, it's carried out annually, and it paints a really interesting picture. So post-pandemic, it's painting a picture of an industry that's thriving. I think it's about 16 billion that's contributing to the economy, so not a number to be sniffed at. There are about 100,000 of us working in PR. It really is an industry and thriving. And sometimes I do some work in schools, and I try and encourage people to join as a career. But it is does still have a problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the stats that always kind of make me stop, and that they're pretty much consistent year after year, is that it's still predominantly white, male, and public school. So we have a pay gap that's about 12%. So this is an industry where, you know, across the levels, it's about 50-50 represented male, female, but at the senior levels, it's absolutely not. So we still have a gender pay gap closing, but a little bit too slowly, in my opinion. It has a real social mobility problem. So if you think that 20% of people that are working in our industry now went to public school, so fee-paying schools, as opposed to kind of 6% of the population nationally, that is telling you that there's a social mobility problem. And in terms of ethnicity, the majority identify as non-white. So I think if we are truly going to kind of represent the clients that, you know, that we're working for, we really do need to transform, and I think we need to transform quickly. So I'm really excited to kind of talk to the panel today about kind of their thoughts and what they're doing, so we can all learn from it. So we have a chat, we have a Q&A, so please do make comments in the chat as we go along. I'd kind of like this to be a conversation. It's a very broad topic. We're not going to cover it all in the hour that we've got today, but it'd be good to see what people think, and also ask questions. So I have some set questions, but I will also come to questions in the Q&A. And so I think I'm going to go to Tara first. So what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you, Tara?
Yeah, I guess, as you say, you know, this is something that we're all talking about for various reasons, especially over the last few years. And, you know, it's been a long time coming. I think for me, it's really about making people understand this is about diversity of thought. And I get quite frustrated when I hear people talk about DE&I, and essentially they're still talking about ticking boxes. But my bit is, do you understand what you're ticking the boxes for? So having gender representation, racial representation, and every kind of representation is because you want that diversity of thought. And as agency owners and as comms people, we're in charge of messaging, and it's so important. You know, we see brands do it very, very wrong all of the time, but understand why this is so important. It's not just the right thing to do, that goes without saying. You know, looking at social mobility and being a good person and a good business owner and a good manager is important, but for me it's about how do we make our businesses more creative and more representative of the wild world that we live in. You know, as a business owner, I find that quite a lot, and I'm sure Rob will share some of that. You don't have to love, like, be best friends with everyone that you work with or that works for you. It's about what's the right makeup of the team that will better service your clients, the brands that you work for, and ultimately better represent you as a brand. So I think my opening gambit is always, this is about diversity of thought, because if you get racial representation correct or gender representation, but everyone still went to public school, well, that wasn't what we were going for here. So it's about really understanding why you need to do this, as well as it absolutely being the right thing to do.
Absolutely, and I like the kind of not box ticking. Absolutely not box ticking. So Rob, so Tara mentioned you a second ago. So what's your view?
I mean, I guess for me, I mean, I'll address the elephant in the room straight away. I am straight, white, male, and I went to public school. So I will never fully understand the profound, backing as to why we sadly have to have these kind of conversations and tackle these topics. But I also know that for me, everyone should just be judged on competence. And if I'm talking about professional hat on for a second, I want the best person for the job. So that's in my head, that's what it means. But I understand that the reason why we have that, for me, it's a lack of understanding. It's a lack of education in terms of understanding each other. So for me, whilst there's a profound stories behind why D&I is a challenge and an issue, I actually think this can be quite an exciting time, because as you just said, Tara, you get to broaden your horizon. That's why they want you go traveling when you're young. You get to experience the world and understand that the bubble that you're brought up in isn't, it's not the right bubble and everyone else is wrong. So whilst, yes, there's some profound challenges behind it, and it's hard to unpick, it's a big bowl of spaghetti, in a way I find it exciting. I understand I have an opportunity to contribute on a personal note taking that, what might be seen as a position of privilege, to help, is nervous at one point, because I know that if I have an opinion, it's never going to be fully educated. But yeah, you know, I like competence, and the best people I've employed haven't been on paper what you'd think. So if we can find a way of reaching out to communities and social mobilities and being able to talk with different people who see the world differently, that's where creativity gets together. My team, at a screenshot, you wouldn't scream, you know, diversity, but we employ people who are very, very different personalities, very, very different opinions, but we have core ethics that we share, and that's why we're a good team. So if I can capitalize and help and take that wider, then I think that's exciting. But there is a lot to unpick. And understanding for me is the key thing. There's no silver bullet, there's no box ticking. This is a big job which will cost in time and money to fix, but it is fixable in my opinion.
There's some good points there, so I think we might come back to some of those. But before we do that, Barrie, so what's it mean to you?
Well, I mean, when I talk about it from the perspective of a charity like St Basils, for me, this all revolves around the equality of opportunity, if that makes sense. Now, I'll probably talk a little bit more about that later on, but what I mean by that is that what we see at St Basils is that people from different backgrounds do not have equal access to opportunity. You know, this is exactly what it says in the tin. You know, I take Rob's point on there, you know, like, you know, I'm very much the same, Rob, as yourself. I come from that kind of background as well. What I've recognised in my 7 years of working in St Basils and working with the cohort that we work with, so just to give a bit more background to it, we're talking about 16 to 25-year-olds mainly. We're talking about people who came from a variety of backgrounds. But the one thing that they all have in common is a lack of options. The way I would describe it, they have a lack of options. And I've realised that about life in general, is that life is essentially just about options that you have. And when you look at the young people that we're supporting at St Basils, is that their options are limited. So they don't have the chance to be in networks. They don't have the opportunity to have money or disposable income to be able to access things. So that there is such a gap between those with options and those without. And what it means is that, you know, so take a prime example and, you know, of your own sector. You know, my understanding of the sector and having spent a little bit of time in that world is that it's all about networks. It's all about being around people. The young people we work with will never have access to those networks. So they're never going to grow in that industry unless we can find ways in which that can happen. So I agree with Rob. I think there is an exciting opportunity. And I take Tara's point on as well, is that, you know, it can't be a tick box exercise. I can't stand that. Whenever I'm working with a company and I can see right away when it's a tick box exercise, I walk away, because it can't be that. It can't be that. This is about, you know, this is about society in general. When you think about the Midlands and how diverse and how culturally rich it is, you know, but when you look at, let's just say it, when I go to a meeting, I see a room full of white males, you know, middle class males. But then I walk outside and I see how diverse this city is. I walk through the, you know, through Digbooth. I walk through the Chinatown area of Birmingham. You know, I walk through all these other areas where there's so much richness to the area that we're living in, but we're not representing that in our major businesses. You know, so there's a lot of work to be done. I love the analogy, Rob, of spaghetti. I think that's a really good way of describing it. There's a lot to unpick from this, but I think that we've been having these conversations for a long, long time, but I'm excited by the fact that there does feel now a real sense of action and people want to do stuff. And that's how, when I was invited to be part of this, I thought this is a great opportunity, because these conversations, it's not just your own industry that's having it, other industries are having it, and that's really important. So I've kind of went off topic a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And you know, social mobility is something that's kind of really close to my heart as well. Yeah. I you know, I have a really powerful story of a colleague of mine, and he started work in an agency, kind of one of the top agencies, and he's expected to bring clients in. And, you know, what he noticed was his peers ringing up their dads or ringing up their uncles, or, you know, to open doors within some of these organizations. And he said, you know, I didn't have access to that. You know, my dad was a bus driver, because, you know, and so, you know, even beginning at the beginning, you know, he felt at a disadvantage. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing more about the work you're doing, Barrie. Yeah. So if we start at the beginning, as Mary Poppins, I think it was Mary Poppins, is it Mary Poppins or Julie Andrews? It doesn't matter. With recruitment, what sort of things are you doing to attract broader candidates? So I know sometimes when I get a slate and I'm like, you know, this isn't a particularly diverse slate. I'm just wondering kind of what sort of things you're doing, Rob, to kind of attract a more diverse slate of candidates to give to your clients.
So I've heard the conversation a few times where, you know, the onus is put on the recruitment consultants, you know, need to do more to offer diversity, or internal talent managers need to do more. And it's understanding, well, where is the problem in the chain, in the process? Is the problem at the recruitment consultant, as in, are there biases, conscious or subconscious, whatever you might be, or prejudice applied in a shortlist status? From my perspective, from a pitch perspective alone, just quickly, like the way we recruit our team and train and support them, I can categorically know that for us, it is just a question of taking the applications, shortlisting, and finding who's best. And there really has been, and I haven't seen any examples, I would say, visibly, I'm behind closed doors in my clients, I couldn't say, but in the last decade, of anything that's screamed to me as uncomfortable, unlawful, or unjust in any of our clients, if we found that, they wouldn't be clients. The problem with the lack of diversity in the shortlist that you might see from the likes of an us to you, I think goes further back. It goes further back into attracting those people to want to apply for the jobs. Now, to split your question quickly into, to answer it succinctly, what can we do more? And there is more that can be done from a recruiting partner, a third-party supplier, if you want to attract. But that in itself is a different service to what you're used to, because you're actually asking us to outreach and to go into maybe working with Barrie and his organization. There are recruitment models for graduates, so slightly going into the privileged category for a second, where they do days of induction training as a recruitment company. Clients come, they observe them interact in presentation scenarios, you know, sort of tasks to see what basic level of competence they might have, even if they don't have the qualifications. Those type of things is what organizations can do more, but in itself is a service. I think where you can have a better impact without changing what you expect or the service that you're talking about from a recruitment company is actually work towards reaching out and communicating and being appealing to a wider audience. I don't think there's any way in heck someone who might be from, you know, from a background Barrie would be working with, who would see one of our roles that we're representing for our client, or an agency is applying directly and think, I should apply for that, they're going to consider me. And when you think that the application system these days is sending your CV, right? Well, what's the CV going to tell you? It's not going to be enough to grasp the attention. So I think rethinking how we do the model, if you want to be proactive in reaching out, there's two problems: changing the model and how we reach to communities, and obviously still making sure that at no point in the selection process are people shortlisted or discounted based on name or assumption of background, ethnicity, sexual preference, whatever it might be. And I've seen some, and I don't know if this is a separate question, so stop me if I'm going off topic. I've seen some of these tick boxing exercises. My clients send me forms asking me, some clients have asked, you know, how many people do we employ who are BAME, which personally on that thing alone just doesn't sit well with me at all. Companies who are doing blind interviewing, blind CVs. Now, I'm a cynic at heart, so I'm a pierce of that, and I don't like that at all. But my business partner quite rightly checked me and said, well, at least they are doing something. So some progress is better than no progress, but it's a plaster and it's not a solution.
Interesting. So one of the questions I was going to ask, actually, I was going to ask a bit later on, actually, blind CVs, yes or no?
No.
No. No.
Not long term. Not long term. If I can have a bit on the fence answer to that, and I think the reason is simple: is it's education, which is more saying understanding. And if you put everyone on the scale, those people are deeply prejudiced. You're not going to change them. And if you find them in your organisation, and there must be a method to find them, then you get rid of them. But there's people on that grey scale who might not even realise they have the most innocent of bias, or might have one that's quite a big bias. We all make, all recruitment consultants are second-hand car salesmen, right? So I just pick on one which is not pretty light, but it's actually understanding each other. And I think businesses will have more long-term profound impact in attraction and retention if they find time to actually sit down and talk. And that needs to be done structurally. And I would advise generally with a third party. We have a third party mentor comes into our company to help us as a board, but he also talks to our team, and sometimes teams he'll find a way, because he's qualified, to get things out of people, which maybe they might not feel comfortable sitting around with their peers and managers. So communication, conversation in a structured way, it's a slower burn, but that's how you'll fix any issues longer term.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, actually, picking up on kind of one of your early points, I think there's responsibilities on both sides, aren't there? So obviously from the recruiter side, but far too often I see cut and paste job description. Why do you need a first class degree in this particular subject to interview for this, particular junior role, for example? So I think
that has changed a lot, actually, Anne-Marie, over our time. I mean, I think Bron would probably agree. When Bron and I started working together, which is more than 15 years ago, sorry Bron, to make us feel old, the industry was, right, you need to be from these universities, you need to have a 2-1, and you need to have experience, which was nuts, because how do you get experience if you can't start somewhere? And we did a scheme called Beehive, which was aimed at graduates, so not really addressing the issue, but it was trying to show companies that, hey, there's some good people that don't have the CV you think is the perfect CV, but are really, really good. And I think that's the issue, is all these blockers that companies are putting on board. They need to have worked at a neighbouring agency. They must have this degree. They're not really a fail-sure fashion of making sure that they're right. What it is, though, is easy, dare I say it, a little bit lazy recruitment. Because it's like, oh, well, I don't have to dig deep at interview. They've done the job at McCann. They'll be fine for us because they kind of do the same industry. But being properly qualified in interviewing and screening is, I mean, it's a job in itself, hence why the likes of us exist. And I think there's a lot of training that needs to be done internally. So how can you sit next to someone that may, Barry's obviously going to be much more clued up on how to do this than me, but if Barry was to introduce one of his someone to a client, and they wouldn't know how to extract the information to know, can we work with this person? And then once they do start, the training induction process that they currently have won't fit. So they need a new training induction process, because there'll be different skills that will need to be introduced. But the outcome could be an absolutely amazing person. And some of the best people who work for me, although admittedly not from a deprived background, have had no experience, no qualifications. They just had the spark. And in this industry in PR, that's biggest the deal. We've seen people in PR degrees courses that have done all the practice, but they've got no idea, no creativity. And that's what the client pays for. We are in a profit-making sector.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to move to, assuming we've got them through the door, Tara, I'm going to direct this to you. So one of the things that we do observe is that, Rob and team have done all the work and we've got people through the door, and then they leave reasonably quickly within 2 or 3 years because they don't think it's a place for them. Maybe they don't see progression, maybe they don't see a sense of belonging. So what do you think is the role of kind of agency leaders in creating that sense of belonging?
I actually think that starts before Rob's job. I think there's a real ego around anyone that says the recruitment process is the problem, as though it's really simple, like, oh yeah, but it must just mean people are really biased somewhere, either internally or externally. So actually, and this feeds into how you create the sense of belonging, it has to start before the process. So your business has to think about an employer brand. So when Rob talked about how are you attracting people, that's your employer brand. So when people land on your social media channels, what do they see? Do they see the diversity? Do they see that representation? What the imagery you use in your website, the words that you use on your website, all of that is part of your employer brand. What does your business care about? So we set up the Team EV Charter, which we actually did the day that everyone did the black squares on Instagram. And we sat and thought, how do we do something? It's about genuine lasting change. And that was about pulling together all of the things that really matter to us, from our charity commitments, diversity and representation, what we do internally, you know, how do we bring equity into our perks for people? So we don't just have a blanket, you get a gym membership. Oh, that's great, isn't it? But half the team have got gym memberships, half of them don't want it. What are the things that genuinely change people's lives? How does the business help with that? And so that has to be at the core of your business. And if it isn't, well, first of all, you're never going to attract the people. So there is absolutely no point going to Rob in the first place and then complaining that there aren't any diverse people coming through. And then when the people come into your business, they're not going to stay. They're absolutely not going to stay, because you've not cultivated a culture and a team that is about helping people to belong and is about being honest about that equity point. So, you know, we as an agency, yes, we are really, really big on flexible working. We gave up our office in the pandemic, all of those things. But actually, we'd done things way before COVID was ever something any of us knew about, because we had someone come back from maternity leave, and I wanted to understand how this business could help them. We wanted to understand, as a business, what roles can we create in the business that can welcome part-time carers and people with other responsibilities that don't want to live the PR lifestyle that we all think we know and love. But we started doing that years ago, because that's how you get people to stay. That's how you genuinely get people in your business. And I think, you know, there's a piece around how are you filtering in that talent pipeline? What are you doing in schools to engage people? What, you know, when you've got a job and you go to Rob, actually, what else do you do as a business that reaches out to people and taps into their creativity and hits, you know, as comms people? If you can't think that, then I would love to know how you satisfy any of your clients' needs. You know, we should absolutely be the people that understand how to get to other people through the right channels. It's what we do. It's absolutely what we do. So I think there's a real kind of ego, and it's too nuanced to say that the problem is at the recruitment stage. I think it's way before that, because if you're not cultivating that culture genuinely from the top down, bottom up, middle, across, and both directions, then you're not going to keep the people. And it's understanding, you know, what are the barriers to, you know, so we kind of map it through in our minds, like, what are the barriers from somebody who's 14 years old through to someone who's 84? What are all the barriers that would stop them ever knowing what PR is, ever knowing that East Village exists, ever knowing what we do as a business and applying, ever coming here because they think it's not for them? And as Rob said, that bit takes time. It takes time to think that through. And, you know, I get it every time I do talks. People are like, oh my God, I want to come and work for you. You know, East Village is a cool young agency. I get that. But I don't want to be a cool young agency that's not for everybody. So within your business, you have to look at those things. And there are people in our business who want to go and network. They love that. They will go to the opening of everything and have every glass of champagne going. That's cool. Those roles exist, and there is a need for that. But actually, then how do we still welcome people who don't drink and have other responsibilities that they have to get home for, or need to work from home 4 days a week to live a better life, but actually do a better job? And so I think sometimes we can think there's a blanket option for everything, and there's not. You still need people who can pick up the phone to their dad and say, Daddy, can you get me in a Tesla? Like, you still, in big agencies in particular, you still need that. But it doesn't mean you can't then create better roles that are better suited to other people. And that goes back to my point around the diversity of thought. It's that your roles should have that diversity within them as well. That yes, there's the typical PR role, you know, the PR girl, the champagne lifestyle. I absolutely lived that. I was that PR girl, and I never want to take that opportunity away from anybody else that wants it too. But I also want to say to somebody that can only commit to part-time, doesn't have any networks, has never even heard of PR or marketing, I also want to be able to create a role for them and utilise their skills, and not make them feel like they're a lesser employee because they're not living this kind of ab-fab lifestyle. So I think we have to remove this nuance from, you know, we have to change everything. well, you don't, well, no, the PR industry it works. There are just ways that we can be better and improve everything. But for me, that retention piece, that sense of belonging has to be at the core of your business from before you even think about recruiting anyone, because people come and they feel uncomfortable. They don't fit, you know, my rule is, and I say to my team, I just want each and every one of you to be able to bring to work the exact amount of yourself that you want to. If you want to bring 95%, the business is for you. If you only want to bring 30%, the business is for you. But I don't want anyone only bringing 20% because they feel uncomfortable. And I think if you're not a leader doing that, you know, your job as a leader is to persuade people that this is the right environment for them, but you also have to action it and live it. So for me, it's not about when someone comes to your door, I give my team branded gilets and branded water bottles. Absolutely, they still get that. But that sense of belonging is something much, much different, much different.
And I'm glad to hear you're not removing the champagne as someone that actually enjoys that bit of the job as well.
Exactly.
So from champagne to not champagne, Barrie. So just talk to us about some of the work that you're doing around social mobility, because I know when we met earlier, it sounded really, really interesting, some of the differences that you're making.
I have to say, I'm loving this conversation, and I'm fascinated with the different viewpoints, and my mind is racing with loads of thoughts, so I'm going to try and boil it down a little bit. But yeah, I think the best way for me to sort of demonstrate, I guess, the barriers that Tara was talking about, and what we see at St Basils. I'm going to use 3 specific examples. I'll try and keep them relatively short, but just to kind of demonstrate what's kind of going on, because I think, again, you know, like some of the stuff that Rob and Tara was saying really resonated with me there. And Tara, your particular point about saying it begins before the recruitment process, I wholeheartedly agree with that, 100%. Because my first example for you involves a young woman who basically we had on a project in Birmingham, and she wanted to do a college course in Solihull, but she couldn't get there. No transport, no income, no disposable income, couldn't afford to do the course. That course was out of reach for her. She couldn't do the course. Now, as a charity, we found a way to make that happen, you know, so she could do that course, and things have went on. So she's qualified from that course. She's now moved on from St Basils. She's got her own place, and she's now qualified. It was a hairdressing course that she wanted to do. Now, that's a great example of what I'm talking about. But there's the thing right there, is that simple thing of not being able to afford a bus pass to go and do the course at the college meant that you know that it was unavailable to her. Another quick example, you know, we've seen a lot of it during the pandemic, and I'm sure a lot of you've seen a lot of this in the news around digital exclusion piece. You know, the whole piece around, you know, you had certain people when schools had to go online, or universities had to go online, colleges, whatever. Some students were able to participate in online learning, and some weren't because they didn't have access to a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone or anything like that. That's a prime example of something that we saw that was a major issue for us, where, you know, yes, in some of our own projects at St Basils, we have training rooms and we have access to computers and things, but not in all, because, you know, of the way that the properties that we've managed to acquire to accommodate people. So what we had was a real issue around digital exclusion. Now, again, I'm not here to big up what St Basils did. Yes, we were able to respond to that need, but it really highlighted that point of, you know, that I come back to the point, equality of opportunity, you know, where those individuals who were taking part in courses, perhaps at a local college, who weren't able to attend a local college and therefore couldn't do their course, meant, you know, that they were going to fall behind and therefore fall out of the system, as it were. And the third one revolves around a particular project that St Basils has. St Basils has a range of different types of projects where you have fully supported 24/7 wraparound support projects. You have your sort of semi-supported, I would describe them a bit like student accommodation in some respects, you know. And then you have this third tier of project, which is called Live and Work. And it was a project that we founded in 2014, where the gap was that young people who want to do apprenticeships are a great way of getting, you know, employment, as we know. Just one problem with apprenticeships. Unless you're living in a family home And unless you're heavily subsidised, there is no way that you're going to be able to live in a private tenancy. How can you afford it? You know, even if you are paid at the top end, the reality is that the cost of a property, especially these days, is out of reach for a lot of people. So how do you make sure that there's this equality of opportunity around apprenticeships? If someone wants to do an apprenticeship but doesn't have the family support network, you know, in order to do that. So essentially what it was an accommodation project where young people could do an apprenticeship with an employer. In this case, it was with the NHS, and had somewhere where they could stay, where they could afford to pay for that property themselves. So the rents were really deflated. So the rents were £40 a week. Have you ever heard of anything in your life where it cost you £40 a week to live in an accommodation project? What was that about? The whole thing about St Basils is not to enable a situation to continue. It's about empowerment. You know, so one of the things that you have to do in real life is pay for your own property. Now, a lot of the young people will come to us, will have to claim housing benefits, and we navigate all that for them while they're with us before they get into an employed role. When they get into employment and the support plan is in place for them, they tend to move on from us quite quickly. That's what we want, because we don't want people staying at St Basils for any period of time. But I come back to the point about that, you know, that social mobility piece in terms of if you don't have access to opportunities and the equality of opportunity, then it's ruled out for a lot of people. So yeah, I mean, there's three very, very quick examples of what I'm, you know, of kind of where we focus it. And I think bringing it back to your own industry, what I would ask is, you know, it's those things we take for granted that are actually the issue here, you know, because yeah, absolutely, you know, you know, those things are big things in terms of kind of access to be able to phone up someone in order to build your networks, because you've got friends, you know, because your parents have been able to create networks themselves and you're able to tap into that. That's all great. Yes, I can talk for days on end about how many creative young people we have working, you know, living at St Basils, as do all other projects. But I'm not wanting to focus specifically on St Basils for this. There is a diverse, talented, rich, you know, workforce out there which you can't access simply because they feel that this industry is out of reach. That is it. They feel it's out of reach. It's out of reach because they can't get to places. It's out of reach because, you know, it seems so far away from their own lives. I mean, you know, I will come back to another example of St Basils. The amount of young people that we have in St Basils who live in Solihull who have never been to Birmingham before, who are, you know, early 20s. You know, that's unheard of. I mean, Rob, I take the point about you saying earlier on about when you're younger, you go traveling around the world. I'll be blunt with you. These people haven't done that. You know, they're not going to have done that. So they're not going to have that wonderful kind of rich background, as it were. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't bring value to any industry that may be open to them. So I guess my plea, if it's a plea, is to think of those simple ways in which we can allow people who don't come from that normal background that you've normally employed from before, the experience, the opportunity to actually have access to that world. And I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at what you would find.
So really, really powerful stories there, Barrie. And I think, you know, the current economic situation is going to be kind of more and more people kind of falling into that. And it's going to be like a bit more real for people. So it's really powerful. So Tara, I think you might just have something just to add on what we've just heard before I go to questions from the audience.
Yeah, I guess it's just to add what we do, really, exactly in line with what Barry was talking about. And I think maybe some of my understanding comes. So I'm a co-founder of a homeless charity and involved in a couple of other homeless charities. And I think, sorry, typical message come through. And I think it's really helpful for people to understand things we do. So we're recruiting at the moment. And one of the things, back to that equity point, is within our recruitment process and kind of invite for interviews, we offer to pay for people's travel. So that's one of the things that we do. And it's very much and it's a real, like, if you need it, let us know. We'll happily pay for your travel. You know, when people join us, whether that's for an internship, an apprenticeship, as a full-time member of staff, they have all of the tech that they need. We do not rely on other people having anything. So laptops, if you need a mobile phone, we'll buy you a mobile phone. If you need Wi-Fi or access to internet in the home that you live, we'll do that too. As energy prices went up, You know, I made sure I did a kind of round robin email to the team that was a real reassuring email, but was also like, look, if anyone, you know, is struggling, obviously everyone's wages have gone up anyway. I've done that. We're a national living wage employer. You know, that's a really simple thing that you can do as a business, but kind of that checking in with your team point. Everyone has a working from home allowance as well. So, you know, not taking for granted that if someone needs pens and post-it notes and all of those things you'd have in an office, that they have access to those. So it goes, you know, very much to Barry's point, think about what all of those barriers are and think about how you can remove them, or at least put a solution or an offer in place that doesn't feel like a big thing. I don't, you know, it shouldn't feel like a big thing for someone to have to say, actually, I'd love to come for that interview, but I can't afford to get there. You know, you preempt that by putting the offer in as though it is just one of those things that you do. And I think when people start to treat all of those, you know, take it for granted moments and things that most of us have, I think you will suddenly start to see a much more diverse and representative group of people, and you will start to really help that social mobility piece.
Yeah, so really small things that you can do that make a big difference, I think. And, you know, a couple of quid for an oyster in London or a travel card, really good. I've got a question from the audience here, and actually, Lisa, I really feel you on this one, actually, because I think this happens quite a lot. So what are people's thoughts on recruiting from other industries to increase diversity? So she says she joined the industry 9 years ago after 11 years in journalism, and found it tough to find someone who would even give you an interview. The industry seemed to have very fixed ideas on the experience required. We have recruited people from outside PR with great success, more so than with some candidates who seem to tick every box. Is there more that we can all do? Rob, I think I'm going to come to you for that.
Yes, thank you. Well, she's very right. The journalism versus PR sort of standoff is a long known one where we've come to heads with clients to say, look, this person's good, like they can do the job, they're culturally a good fit for their journalism and with PR, and it's just never the two can meet. Obviously, it would depend on the level of the role. If you're expecting to employ someone to a senior role and lead a team, and they're coming from a different industry, that can pose challenges as to where you can close that gap of skills. So wherever you come from an industry that's not the exact job, you're going to need some time, some input in order to get you there. And that means you're slowing down the output to the client. There's a cost, time, or even training associated it. And this is the problem with the PR agency scene, maybe perhaps more. Generally SMBs, small run, tight margins, you know, trying to get the overhead, and that investment in cost is what I think is creating a blocker. Now, not excusing it, I think I'm just kind of trying to think where it comes from. My argument on the other side of the coin is this is a very candidate short industry where you can't find enough people to fulfill the jobs. There are not enough candidates with the right background out there. So the longer you wait, surely the damage is worse to you as a business to deliver to your clients. It's damaging the industry because you're not letting enough people in. So if you want the PR industry to grow, you said 16 million, well, if you want to make that 30 billion or whatever you said, sorry, Henry, you're going to have to let people in, and you're going to have to find them from other backgrounds. And it is bonkers, lady's name, Lisa, that she would be bought from journalism. It's not like she's come from a completely different industry, financial services. But going back to my Beehive competition, the graduate thing that we did pre-COVID, the people who ended up winning the most rewards were from maths degrees. They were from completely unrelated subjects. And I know we're talking higher education and we're going off topic, but the principle applies the same. But companies have to find time and budgets for it. And I think if you, and that's a real hard thing companies have to actually look at. So I would always look at anyone who comes in from a CV and talk to them. If they look good and they sound good and they kind of got the right base skills, then I think if you can give a new employee coming into your business a lot beyond the CV and the benefits, I'm talking if you can develop them and if you can kind of grow them from there to there, the fulfillment and the engagement and the loyalty you'll get from that team member is much bigger than someone who just moved from one agency to the other agency, because they're the people who go, well, I've moved there, I might as well move there, I might as well move there. I know that's generic, and I know there are some great companies, a great culture, but I think they're missing a massive point by going to other industries. But companies have got to make space on the P&L, and I know it's crass to talk about the money, but I think if you're deep down on these companies, a lot of it is time and money. But good people need time to invest. So I think they need to have a different way of recruiting skills and be a bit more planned. So rather than, oh crap, we need someone yesterday and they need to be perfect, it's got to hit the ground running. It's like, we need some more skills. How can we help create those people? And that can be social mobility, and it could be other sectors as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, this one. So if I look at my own journey into PR, if I was starting today, there's no way that I would have a job in PR, because my experience is that people tend to recruit people that are like them. So the only reason that I'm in PR, I came from a marketing background, is I happened to work for a boss who really liked me. We got on really well. She got another role and she wanted someone to head up her comms function. I said, well, I don't have any experience in comms. She goes, no, but you've got attitude, you've got, common sense, you've got this, that, the other. And, I think I've made a reasonable job of it, kind of when I moved over. So I think sometimes it just requires a little bit of bravery. And I do sometimes go onto LinkedIn and have a look at some of the comms adverts. I'm thinking, no, I'd never get that one. I'd never get an interview at that one, never get an interview at that one. All jobs that I could perfectly do well standing on my head. So I think sometimes we do need to kind of balance the very specific requests of line managers with actually giving people an opportunity.
There was a good article on LinkedIn, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was talking about risk recruitment and actually taking punts on people. You will get bad apples and it will be costly, but actually they did studies that over time, the best talent comes from taking a risk. And if you play it safe, go for the safe CV, then you'll get some good people and some bad apples too. But actually, there's been a lot of research around that's the best people. I mean, I'll take my now business partner, Rebecca. So when we started up, we were in a little office. And it was a managed office, and there was a reception, and the reception took out the calls of all the companies and then shot them everywhere. And there was this young lady who took calls, and she always put the wrong calls through. She already got everything wrong. She had no qualifications. I think she left that from beauty therapy, but there's just something about her determination and grit and attitude. And we gave her a job, and she made tons of mistakes, didn't know what she was doing. Had to negotiate a few sticky situations for the clients, but every time she got up, the energy and the creativity and the engagement, and she's now a director and shareholder of our business, and she's an absolutely formidable manager, a credible recruiter, and that's partly to do with us and looking after her and developing her and investing her over the 11 years she's been with us. But the majority of the share is on her, but it's having the talent to find people that don't look the part, don't have the experience for the part, but finding that spark. And it can come from other industries, and certainly journalism and PR, there's lots of correlations and differences. But I can see Barrie nodding, because it's a real perfect example of how, but it takes time, it takes skill. And just while I'm talking before I shut up, I think that the biggest thing is, you mentioned at the beginning, Anne-Marie, if a lot of companies are run by people who look like me, then they're the people who can make the biggest difference. And I'd like to think that the majority of those do want to make a difference. They just don't know how. They're probably feeling a bit uncomfortable on what they can do. I'm not making excuses at all, but I think being around a table and talking and having ideas and deciding as a business, because it's the right thing to do, what's success to you as a business? Is it maximizing your profit by minimizing your recruitment costs? Or is it is success having a profound impact on the industry, the world, while you're around? And the latter would certainly be how we run our business. So it is a big problem, but if you put budgets aside for it, if you can put budgets aside for gym memberships, then I think you can certainly put budgets aside for this.
Yeah. I mean, to me, success would be opening up the survey and being surprised, because the numbers have moved. So we will see. I'm going to ask you a slightly different question now. So one of the things that kind of vexes me a little bit is this pay gap. 12% pay gap, male and female, and there's obviously a slightly bigger 16%, I think it is, ethnicity pay gap from the information that we've got. And I understand that in the US, there's been an act passed, which means that all recruitment roles have to have the salary on them. So I just wondered kind of what your thoughts are, maybe kind of Tara, about kind of, being open and upfront and transparent about salary.
Yeah, so we put our salaries on, and actually my hesitation used to be to not have it on there because I didn't want to put anyone off that maybe was paid more than the role we were advertising for. So I think sometimes, I think it goes back to Rob's point around a lot of the time, it's just being honest with yourself about your own thought process and your own biases. And as someone mixed race, I find everything around diversity, equity and inclusion quite uncomfortable, because you sit in a very strange place and you have to be honest about that. And I've had my own moments with the recruitment process where, I've been like, oh my God, they went to my university. And it was so innocent. But until you recognise those things, until I recognise, oh, the reason I didn't want to put salaries on was because I didn't want to put people off who we'll find the money if they're great. I then in turn realised by not putting them on there, we were potentially putting people off because there wasn't that visibility and they needed to understand the nature of it. So I think there's a real be honest with yourself around what your thought process is. I'm sure there's, as Rob says, a lot of the time it's very innocent, it's not about making excuses for people. But yeah, we put them on there. It's tough, It's hard at the minute because people are paying crazy money for roles, so it's competitive. But if you do your research and you understand you're not underpaying people, if you can't afford to pay, especially in-house roles are absolutely insanity at the minute. But if you can, sorry Rob, if you can bring people into your business and show them why there's a real benefit to develop your career in your business, you can overcome some of that.
Yeah, I mean, you might call it insanity. I might say that we're paying people what they're worth.
Yeah, I think it's as a small business though, I've seen account manager roles in-house that are like 70 grand or something. And I'm like, guys, we're little small agencies out here. We can't charge clients the money that you're paying for people. So I do think there is a balance. Like for me, I want to pay people what they're worth and more, but I'm also a small business owner. So there's just a reality around that.
Just quickly on the salary thing to give everyone a little bit of an insight. So obviously we do a lot with LinkedIn and we spend quite a bit on LinkedIn. We get a lot of insight from them. If you don't put a salary on a job, I might misquote here, so sorry LinkedIn, but something like 70% decline in application rates without a salary on it. Transparency and honesty, 100%. On the salaries at the moment, sort of agree with Tara a little bit. They are getting massively inflated. I don't think it's sustainable. It's because it's candidate short and it's a supply and demand issue, which we could all fix with everything we're talking about today. The in-house salaries will always be a good part because they want to pull people in and not outsource, and that's always going to be the case. So I think there's been a little bit of leveling out on the gender and ethnicity pay gap. Marie, I got to say that's one that interests me. Any insight into that? It's not something that, if just from a feedback perspective, I don't say it doesn't exist, and certainly I can only talk about the industry that we're in at the moment. Is not something that I've seen in the way clients handle salaries at offer, but that's not to say that there hasn't been experiences and there's other things that maybe we can do around that. I think how people got into their career probably affects it more. So if they've been clever and they've got all the degrees and qualifications and their work experience, they've probably come in high. If they've maybe come in if they've had a social mobility issue and they've actually cracked the industry, so those in a cracking job and they've got the role, they might come in at a lower level and there might be advantages taken on them to not, once they are in the good zone, to bring them up into their more, shall we say, qualified peers. But certainly I'm not seeing a huge amount. I mean,
I have seen it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So let me give you a little story, because I just think it's a lesson to all of us, really. It's a true story, and so which is why I have to protect the names and the organisations to keep their anonymity. But a female went for a role. She was offered the job and a salary. And she's like, oh yeah, that sounds like a reasonable number. And she actually said to the hiring manager, because someone had coached her to do this, and this is why I'm going to coach all my mentees to do exactly the same. She said, look, I really want the job. I really like you, like everything I've seen, and I will accept the offer if you can confirm to me that I am being paid exactly the same as, you know, the equally qualified man doing exactly the same role. And he said, oh, I don't know, let me go away and check. And he went away and checked, and he gave her something like, it was a 30 or 40 grand increase. So I mean, it was quite a senior job. So sometimes it's not kind of intentional, but I think by doing those little checks and balances, which is even going away and having a look at your kind of distribution, you can just make sure that we're paying people equally. But I think we're kind of up to time now, aren't we, Bron? So I think I'm going to thank everyone for their contribution, and I'll hand over to you to say a few final words, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And just to say, wow, there's a lot to think about and some excellent examples of best practice. And as you say, it's no easy fix, but I think there's an awful lot of suggestions and thoughts and considerations in there that we can all take on board to move things forward. And Anne-Marie, I know we're out of time, but I would strongly recommend that people have a look on the PRCA website and look at all the things that we have already done and all the things that we have got planned for the future, because I think, you know, you're doing an awesome job. And just to say, yeah, thanks everyone for their time. Please, members, do let myself or Joe know if there are suggestions for events that you've got. You know, we're here to serve you, so let us know what we can put on. Thank you, Joe, from the PRCA, for arranging today. And yeah, have a great afternoon. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon.